Howdy, folks. Happy Friday. Thank God it's Friday. Here for the next hour before the weekend. A lot of stuff going on. A notable game in Long Island yesterday. A coach gets fired, but we're going to start with some baseball when it comes to pre-show. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, we'll talk Bryce Harper. I mean, it was a big deal yesterday. I got a text, and it was from my best friend in New York, and he told me, and so I called him for a sec, and then I let it sit in, and I called him back because, I was shocked that there was no opt-out, but Harper said he didn't want the opt-out. I'm still shocked that the Phillies didn't want the opt-out, but okay. Not after 3 years, though. I would have, made it like 5 or 6 because I think it's impossible to market a guy for just 2 years when you're worried about him opting out in 3. But beyond that, everybody had this Bobby Bonilla joke yesterday, and that's fine. But when they deferred that money for Bobby Bonilla, it allowed them to sign Hampton, and they ended up getting David Wright out of it for the draft pick. And so people want to forget that. That's fine. The Met fan in me says that's okay. The part of this contract that I hate is the $22 million he's going to make for the last 3 years at like 37, 38, 39. Now, the Phillies fans are like, well, we'll win a couple titles by then. It's okay. The DH will be there. These are all sounds great. And then someone on my Facebook page said, yeah, the Angels thought the same thing when they gave Pujols that contract.
Yep.
They didn't win anything with Pujols, and it didn't look good at the end. So it's a big risk, but they sold 100,000 tickets yesterday. That's the answer right there.
So, go ahead.
So a couple of things. So first of all, on the Bonilla deferment, I'm Russ, and I'm a huge Met fan. I am so tired of hearing this because there is a myriad of players who are getting way more money than them that gets ignored. And take a look at the Washington Nationals in terms of how much they deferred of Max Scherzer and everybody else. And part of the reason why Harper didn't accept the deal of the $300 million, there was rumors that $100 million or more of it was deferred money, which is why he didn't accept the deal. And interesting, Tom Verducci just wrote a whole column, and I was just reading it before we went on, in terms of the backstory behind it and the back and forth. And Harper didn't want the opt-outs. Harper was comfortable. If he wanted a short-term deal, and honestly, if he really wanted to place a bet on himself, he could have taken a 4 or 5 year deal that's been rumored with the Dodgers. That was anywhere from $40 to $45 million a year has been the rumor, and he could have come back afterwards for 5 more years. But getting the $13 million at the 330, those last 3 years enabled them to lower the AAV to a much more reasonable range. I mean, they probably could have gone for 10 years 330 or 10 years 3. He wanted those extra years, so it cuts down the AAV. But I agree with you. The back end of that contract could be very ugly, which is why pay attention to when the NL gets the DH and if the universal DH goes into play, because that's where you're going to see a lot of these guys on the longer-term deal. I mean, even in New York with Robinson Cano, if that deal happens the next year or two, you're going to see all these guys who are aging guys move to the DH.
You understand that's why I hate the DH, though. Well, that's exactly why I hate the DH, because the invention of the position is because a player can't play in the field anymore or never could. Well, and for me, that's not a fully functional baseball player.
So you're going to argue with me that Edgar Martinez didn't deserve to get into the Hall of Fame?
I will argue with you. Yeah.
I'm disagreeing with you about 1,000%. Same with Paul Molitor.
Refresh my memory here. Is deferred payments like Bonilla's after a player's retired, does that go against the luxury tax, or is that off the books?
No.
It
doesn't. I'm aware of.
It's off the books. I think it's off the books. But again, I don't know. Again, it's the salary. Well, again, the salary obviously you make has an impact on the books, right? I'm assuming in this case they're not since there is no deferment with Harper's contract. That's a moot point at this point in time. But if there is a deferment, I'd have to go back and check the CBA.
Because in my opinion, luxury tax.
I think it should, though. When you think about it, right? Because it's actual salary that you're paying a guy, even though it's a deferment.
Remember, A-Rod got released by the Yankees. He had like $27 million owed to him, and that counted against their cap. It counted, or not against the cap, because there's no cap. It counted
against what their budget was.
Right, exactly.
Look, the same thing with David Wright, right? He's got a settlement he's getting from the Mets, but the likelihood is a lot of that will be recouped based upon the way the insurance and how they've structured the deal in terms of the wording of whether or not he retired or not, which is why they were so reluctant last year at the year-end ceremonies to use the word retirement because of the insurance impact.
Well, the whole thing in terms of like the opt-outs or lack thereof when it comes to Harper, I mean, really, it's a moot point because he's got a no-trade clause. So if he wants out, he can say, trade me here. And then unless that team doesn't want him, the thing is like it's not going to shorten the contract. It's a 13-year contract. If he's healthy, if he plays, he's going to get paid. But go ahead.
I was gonna say the other thing to point out, like when you bring up the insurance, it's 75%. So even if the last 3 years he were disabled to the point where they did what they did, Mets did what they did with David Wright, and he was insurance, it would still be $17 million. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and I looked
more up Bobby Bonilla, I might add.
Yeah, a lot more.
And I looked up, Russ. It's like of like 8 or 9 contracts that I saw in terms of length and in terms of amount.
Yeah,
almost all of them were baseball.
Yeah, it's very hard to find other ones in other sports. It's
well,
true.
I think James Harden in the NBA is the long-term deal. That's big money. There's one in boxing. I think Canelo Alvarez is like $35 million a year. But all of them, it's standard.
DiPietro had that deal.
Yeah, but DiPietro's was only a $4 million cap hit. It was just the length. It was 50.
But again, here's the funny thing. Even that day, everybody's like, well, it's only a $4 million cap hit. And I said, what if he becomes your backup goalie at $4 million a year? And that happened sooner than most of them thought. And when he was a backup goalie for $4 million a year, all of a sudden it was a bad situation.
That compliance buyout from the lockout, that was a godsend for the Islanders in terms of excuse me. Okay, let's get the show started. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Friday, March 1st, 2019.
I'm Jan Levine.
with no emotion. Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
I'm Michael Agello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Sorry, just doing my robot voice. Okay, guys, we'll start with the news from last night. I mean, I was focused on this game, and any Islander fan after July 1st looked at the schedule and circled this one, probably in blood. February 28th and Nassau Coliseum, John Tavares returns. We saw the vitriol play out in the parking lot with fans running over Tavares jerseys with their truck in the pregame where they're throwing jerseys and plastic snakes onto the ice. During the game when they're chanting asshole at a guy who played for that team for 9 years.
Captain.
And was their captain, and then chanting Barzy's better and something. I mean, okay. I understand the pain inflicted on the fan base, but your pain was misaimed at John Tavares.
There were even hand towels that said traitor, and I'm not sure who made those, but they were out there. Again,
probably News 12.
I start with News 12 because growing up on the island, and Jan knows this, they used to be a very good, respectable, by the book. When a guy like Bob Wolf was there was a lot of gravitas there, and we'd all watch it, and Bob was great. Now they've gone tabloid. They went and made this, ridiculous video. Like I said, it looked like a bad wrestling video. And then they got fans even more riled up than they were. They found the really nasty ones. And then last night, fans were in the minority as far as the ones that were clapping during the video, where you could see John Tavares was really touched and then actually had the class to clap back at the fans, and half of them or more were just nasty, saying stuff, booing them. I get it during the game, right? You want to touch – every time he touches a puck, you want to boo. That's all well and good. The fact that you showed him nothing for all the years he was there, he was your best player. Despite ownership, he tried to give you the most success he could. I can't think of a guy who carried a franchise on his back any better in the NHL, other than maybe Sidney Crosby, because he had a lot more players to do it and was more successful. But this was just it was disgusting, and I was embarrassed to be a Long Islander.
So a couple of things. So I have a bunch of friends of mine who went to the game, obviously, given where I live. And it started back on July 1 when he signed with the Pajama Boy chants and everything else associated with that.
Which, by the way, he wasn't wearing Leaf pajamas. He was wearing Leaf blankets. So idiots, look at the video, look at the picture on Twitter, and adjust your stupid criticism. But go ahead.
So Blanket Boy would be better?
Blanket Boy would be more accurate.
Blanket Boy to make my happy over here. Now, again, look, I understand the vitriol. Part of it is because of the manner in which he left. And again, as you said, Mike, the term misguided is probably very good, right? So we talked about it on the day it happened with the trade, when the signing happened. It's first him saying that he wanted to stay. And that's what drove a lot of the Isles fans' ire, was the fact that they felt that he wanted to stay, which at the time he quite very well likely wanted to stay.
Correct.
So at that time, Lamoriello and Trotz were not running the team. Garth Snow was running the team. He could have gone to him and explicitly tried to find out definitively, hey, I'm going to present you with an 8-year contract worth this amount of dollars. Are you definitely going to sign on the bottom line? If not, we're going to protect ourselves from an organization and maybe trade you elsewhere to recoup some assets. They decided not to do that, or B, they got some assurances from him that they think he was going to sign. Lamoriello and Trotz comes in. They have the negotiating period. Lamoriello has no ties to Tavares at all. Neither does Trotz, because neither one of them have been in the organization for an inordinate amount of time. And Lamoriello is not the kind of guy that hitches his wagon to one guy, even though he signed, Ilya Kovalchuk to a long-term deal. He's not the kind of guy that's going to hitch his wagon to one guy for an extended period of time. He's going to have to be the guy.
And there's a debate whether that was Lou or that was the ownership of the Devils.
Right, correct. Tavares clearly agonized over this decision. This wasn't a decision he made lightly. You can use the argument that his wife is from the area, was a nurse, wanted to go back there. You can use all the arguments. He clearly agonized over this decision of making it. And look, I make it akin to, and Russ, you can appreciate this, if Brian Leach had ever had the opportunity to go to free agency and he hadn't signed, how would Ranger fans have treated him when he came back to the Garden if he had signed elsewhere?
Right.
I'm hoping that we wouldn't have thrown stuff at him. I'm hoping they wouldn't have thrown plastic snakes. I'm hoping we would have thrown a jersey, which fortunately did not make contact, and the guy probably should be tossed out of the arena who threw that, because God forbid something was in the jersey and hit him and hurt him. And look, I understand the vitriol, but I also understand honoring the guy when he comes back. And basically for giving him all that giving him props and honor for everything he did for the organization, because as you said, ownership and management did a horrific job of surrounding him with talent. He carried that team in the series over Florida. He's the reason why they advanced to the next round in that series.
He scored that huge overtime goal.
Yep.
People are forgetting about that.
Yep. So he's the main reason he was the face of your franchise. He played that role with aplomb and honor and never represented you poorly in public.
How many hospitals did he go to? A ton.
And he did a ton. He did everything you wanted a captain and the face of your franchise to do. Now, if you want to be upset because he left, I get it. I probably would be the same if a guy who I love ended up going elsewhere. And Lord knows I have the number of jerseys of guys that I bought lately from the Rangers who are no longer with this team. But I'm still a fan. But in this situation, as opposed to guys who get traded, he made a decision to go. So if you want to boo him, that's fine. But at least have the courtesy during the program that the team does for him to show him a little bit of honor and then resume the booing afterwards. But to do it while it was classless, they showed certain guys who were clapping. But as you'd say, 90 to 95% of the fan base was probably booing him like crazy during the tribute, which to me was the most inappropriate thing of all.
And Tavares raises his stick and
he clapped
the crowd while TSN pans the crowd, and more than a few guys at Nassau Coliseum are flipping him the bird. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, but and I'll just make this example. When PK Subban went back to the Bell Center, that was an acrimonious trade. Most of the criticism went toward Bergevin and the ownership. He got a standing ovation when they showed the video when he returned. James Van Riemsdyk and Tyler Bozak, it wasn't acrimonious that they left Toronto. It was just a reality that they were going to sign someplace else because the Leafs were going to spend their money elsewhere.
They got more money. They did.
They got more money. They went where it was a benefit to them. When they came back to Toronto, they were given standing ovations and acknowledgement from the crowd for all their years of service. It is embarrassing completely and utterly that the fans, that the Islanders fans did this. But they have that right. They paid their tickets. I think the people who threw jerseys should have been thrown out of the building, but I don't know if that's the case.
I mean, good luck retiring his number now. He'll probably want nothing to do with it.
Oh no, it's not going to happen. No way.
I don't think they were going to do it anyway. I mean, even though he was there for 9 years, I don't think they were going to retire.
I mean, he had 500 goals.
I'm not arguing with you.
I think
he didn't. He didn't have 500 goals.
No, he didn't have 500 goals.
Well, he had
9 years.
Close to it.
Yeah, he was I think fifth career in scoring behind
Potvin, Trottier, Bossy,
and LaFontaine.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a pretty good group. It's a pretty good.
Now let me switch from the reaction to the actual game, because this is where I think Toronto fans should be worried, because this was a game, and this is the second time they've played the Islanders. I believe the first time they played Garrett Sparks as well, but I'm not 100% sure. They played. It was a second of back-to-back games. They played Edmonton the night before. They played Freddie Anderson in goal. They played their backup Garrett Sparks in goal in that heated situation, and he gave up 6 goals. Not all his fault, but a few of them were bad. They had an injury to Jake Gardner that they knew about before the deadline. Travis Dermott gets hurt. Their bottom pairing was one guy who hadn't played since before Christmas in Justin Hall, and another guy who should never play in the NHL in Martin Marincin, and he was responsible for one of the goals for his pathetic defensive play. The bigger concern, though, and I want to put this to you guys, is their team did not show up. After it was 2-1, they had a tying goal from Zach Hyman. It was negated because of a video review for offside, which I'll go into that after this. And after that, the Leafs folded up. It was an embarrassing, bordering on gutless performance by a team that is supposed to be one of the teams that is going to contend for the Stanley Cup. And I will say to you, they didn't add any sandpaper at the deadline. They didn't bolster their defense. They couldn't foresee Dermott getting injured, but their defense now is painfully bad. And if they go up against a team like Boston is going to run them out of the building. I'm not, Leaf fans should be worried right now.
That's what we say today. I mean, it was 500 points, I was thinking, but he actually had 621 points because I had just seen a highlight recently. And so, I said goals instead of points, but still 621 points for Tavares. I saw some disturbing things in that game. Garrett Sparks first. He definitely didn't help the confidence of that team on a couple of those goals because it just felt like if there was ever going to be a one-on-one situation, he was going to lose it. And when players get that feeling, it really rips through a team. They won't talk about it, but you could just see it body language-wise. Right. That was one thing. The other thing was, and Mike and I did talk about it, that there was only that one situation where there was a little bit of a fracas when Justin Hall was getting into it with Clutterbuck, and then Matt Martin eventually got – that was about the only time. But Jake Muzzin was a target that whole game, and as a result had a horrible game. That's the worst I've ever seen Jake Muzzin play.
Ladd ran him early in the first period. I mean, it was basically a charge, but they didn't call it. It was a run from the blue line. He walloped Muzzin, went high on him. He got hit again by, I think, Clutterbuck. And then he was responsible in terms of giveaways for the second goal. It was a 3-on-1 going the other way, and then the giveaway on the Cizikas shorthanded goal. So, he had a terrible game. Sparks gives up that goal. It was 4-1, so you could say the game was over with. Garrett Sparks has let in so many goals from long range from the blue line, like flutter balls. That he's terrible on long range shots. And I think the Cizikas goal was pretty bad too. And again, that bottom pairing of Marincin and Hall were -5. Hall was the only one who responded. Clutterbuck hit him. He came back and hit Clutterbuck. Other than that, there was no pushback from the Leafs. And you can say, okay, you've got a team here. It's a skilled team. You have to have somebody who pushes back when a team pushes you around.
I mean, Hyman, Tavares, and Marner were good. The rest weren't.
Yeah.
What was going on? And I'll let you talk, Jan. Sorry. Sure. What was going on with Morgan Riley breaking his stick on the bench? What was that frustration about? Is that something that's new?
No, I don't know what specifically it was. I know that it may have been because they, especially
on jammed his stick 3 times. He was talking to one of the coaches, and he jammed his stick after that 3 times into the bench.
Especially early in the game, I know that the Leaf bench was having a problem with the way the game was being called. Andreas Janssen got bowled over 2 or 3 times. No call, and I mean there weren't a lot of penalties.
Hold on, I'm sorry. This guy Bill Nettleberg in the chat room is saying Russ is a Ranger fan, so he'll lie. Listen, if you know anything about me, Bill, not only did I write an article that John Tavares could change the franchise for the Islanders, but I've been to a ton of Islander games. Just because I grew up a Ranger fan doesn't mean I didn't respect the Islanders. So what you said is a bunch of baloney.
Okay.
So, go ahead. I live 10 minutes from the Coliseum, and I have a ton of friends who are Islander fans. So they were mixed in terms of their view going into yesterday. Again, I knew a ton of people who brought signs to the game yesterday, a ton of people who were angry that he left. But in terms of the game itself, I mean, you talked about chippiness. You had Barzal also cross-checking Tavares a bunch of times on the video. That wasn't called. I mean, we talked about it before the deadline. We talked about it 2 weeks before the deadline. We all liked the Muzzin acquisition. We all felt that they needed another blue liner, even though they had gotten Muzzin to help with defense. and we felt that they needed a guy to provide sandpaper not only on the back line but on the fourth line. I mean, this is not a new topic that we've discussed, and it's been repeated for weeks and weeks and weeks, and yet the organization and the team, for whatever reason, didn't go about adding any of those pieces at the deadline. Now, part of it could have been cap concerns, but there's ways of getting around cap concerns with teams who are willing to eat cap in order to facilitate a deal. So, I think yesterday, as you talked about, we said Boston, Toronto. Boston's going to literally play a very heavy game against them. They're going to pound them every single opportunity that they get, and Toronto is going to hope to use their skill to offset. But the problem is, in a situation like that, Boston has a ton of skill in addition to their ability to play a heavy game, which makes them tough. On the flip side, I mean, Russ, and you and I talked about this already. First round at the Coliseum is going to be difficult for any team coming in, regardless of where the Islanders end up falling in the standings. So if they win the division, or if they finish second behind the Capitals, or even third behind Capitals and the Blue Jackets, any team coming into the Coliseum is going to have a brutal challenge facing them, because it's a difficult place to play in. The Islanders rev off the crowd that's riled up like crazy. The smallness of that arena now and the limited seats that they have makes it appear even louder than it really is. And look, yesterday the Islanders were loaded for bear. You could have seen there was no way they were going to lose that game, given all the stuff that's been going on around Tavares. Toronto came in. You wanted them to show a little bit more, and to me, that's the concerning part. Is that as you said, Mike, they kind of gave up after the score got 2-1, but especially 3-1. They kind of turtled a little bit and kind of went into their shell, as opposed to having the pushback. The Islanders just fed off that and kept ramping up the intensity and the energy, building off of the fan base.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say it any better than that. I know that Babcock after the game basically said, if we play like that in the playoffs, we're going to lose. And that's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. He didn't, he didn't go full out in terms of his, in terms of expressing his frustration, but you can tell this is not a team that is built along the lines of the way Babcock wants it to be built. And I think going forward over the next few years, I mean, next year, and we'll get off the Leaf thing in a second here, but next year he's going to have less players that are considered Babcock players on that team. More than likely, they're not going to re-sign Ron Hainsey. More than likely, they're going to trade Connor Brown. I saw, I think it was Pierre LeBrun talk about a Connor Brown for Matt Benning deal. That was what was being talked about between Ottawa, between the Leafs and Edmonton. So they're talking about shedding Connor Brown, who's one of Babcock's favorites, as as a cap casualty, because they have to sign. He's making $2 million. So it's going to get further and further away from what Babcock considers like the type of team that he likes. And what is that going to result in? I mean, right now we're almost through half of his contract, and he's got 2 losses in the first round. And at this point, I would say likely a first round loss to Boston in the first 4 years. That's not what the Leafs signed up for. By this point, they expected to be further along and further and deeper into the playoffs, and that's not what's happening. So, I mean, it's going to be that'll be an interesting thing if they do take another early exit in the playoffs. Anyway, let's get off this and get to the breaking news of the day, which was the surprising firing of Guy Boucher. Now, it wasn't surprising that Guy Boucher was going to be fired, because the Senators are terrible, but they fire him 3 days after the deadline, make Mark Crawford the interim coach, and put out this statement afterward, looking for basically a young coach who can teach our players and blah 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 blah. Like this all this like happy horse crap. This is an organization in chaos. It's a tire fire. It's an embarrassment. Eugene Melnick, I don't know whether this was a Melnick initiated move. I know Doug McClain on Hockey Central said he thought, based on the criticisms of Melnick in the past when Brian Murray was general manager, that it's possible he just said, let's fire this guy. But Jan, I mean, I don't know how bad it can get or how much worse it can get in Ottawa, because it looks like it's just completely a disgrace right now.
I mean, I found the comments that he made, though, interesting in terms of when the rationale he gave associated for the firing, which is to me the more curious part of anything else. When he uses the line of basically, I think what he said exactly was, I told him our play recently wasn't acceptable. No more excuses. And I'm looking at it and thinking, weren't you the guy that got rid of Erik Karlsson Weren't you the guy that just got rid of Matt Duchene? Weren't you the guy that got rid of Mark Stone? Weren't you the guy who's basically changed your organization to the point of where the talent base that existed, you played better than you should have in the beginning of the season. Now you're settling back to the level of where you should be at. Craig Anderson was hurt and hasn't played particularly well. I mean, I'm not quite sure what kind of message you're looking to send, and why you're doing this move on March 1st kind of makes you shake your head as well, given where the organization is going. So I don't understand in terms of why the rationale for making the decision generically doesn't make sense, and then why you're making that decision now also doesn't make sense. But it's going to be interesting. I mean, obviously they put in an interim coach for right now. They're going to start their long-term search. I mean, Russ, I'm sure you've seen the name Alain Vigneault come up a couple times because he's probably the biggest name that's out there in terms of coaching candidates, and whether or not he's particularly going to be good with what's expected to be a very young team.
Yeah, that's the part I'd worry about with Vigneault.
Right,
yeah.
and that's the thing we talked about in New York. Is part of the reason why he probably had to go is because he's much better with an experienced team. He's not as good with a very young team that has to be developed. So Ottawa's got an enormous amount of problems. Look, we like them getting Brandstrom in the deal. That was their key acquisition. You like Thomas Chabot. Yep. But there's so many holes on that team in terms of that have to be remediated. And now you've gotten rid. Look, it's feasible. Duchene comes back and resigns there. We don't know what's going to happen. But losing Carlson, losing Duchene, losing Stone, as well as the other issues that exist with that team, I'm looking more at I'm looking more at the owner and the GM than I am at the coach at this point.
Well, I'll just say this, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of candidates when when the season is over with. I don't think Mark Crawford fits the description of what they're looking for. I think they brought in Crawford as an interim. As he was an assistant for Boucher, but they brought him in as the interim, so they don't finish in last place overall. And if that's the case, then that's pretty sad motivation. But I think that what's going to end up happening is it's going to be a guy who is a good teacher who maybe coached in the AHL, who they can sign on a long-term deal. I mentioned to Russ, somebody like Luke Richardson, who coached in Binghamton for a while, but there are other guys out there.
He's revered there, yeah.
Yeah, he's revered, very revered. And if it's not him, then maybe Sheldon Keefe, if he decides he doesn't want to wait until wait with the Marlies, and if he wants an NHL job. I mean, it's going to be whoever it is. They need to get a long-term deal. They also need the organization needs to realize that they have to be patient, because this is basically, you're going to finish bad for a couple years. Melnick says he's not going to spend money until 2021. I don't know. I don't foresee Melnick all of a sudden disappearing in a poof of dust. He's not going anywhere, folks. You can't make him sell the team. Maybe the NHL can, but you can't make him sell the team, even if you don't show up at the building. So, Ross, do you think that that's the direction that they go, a young guy?
Yeah, I ultimately think so. I think they're saying they want to get the best coach available, but I think they're going to find out that the best coaches available don't want an upstart team that they might have to wait 3 to 5 years to get rolling. So I think they're going to have to get somebody else who's more into that, and I think they'll find that. I mean, that's what Dallas Aikens was trying to do back in the day, and it didn't work out great for him the first time. But you have to get somebody with the kind of temperament that is willing to just teach. Like, that's where it's going to be. There are guys that you don't have to teach a ton to, like Chabot and Kachuk, but they're still young, so they still have lessons to be learned too. Right. Yeah, they're in a spot right now where it's just so easy to criticize them that I'm just going to lay off, because it's obvious. Like, we know what's going on. We've seen what's going on with the building. I just hope the Ottawa fans get to keep their team there. I know that's a passion for them. That's my biggest question. But right now, this is all part and parcel of even in the press release that was read, they mentioned that this is a rebuild. They're going to keep saying that, and it's like,
is that a first? Because I never remember a press release saying not just the Toronto Maple Leafs, but the rebuilding Ottawa Senators.
Right. Like it's part of their tagline now. So, like, that's fine. If you want that to be part of the narrative, that's great. But at some point, your fans will not accept the rebuilding Ottawa Senators anymore, and will expect more.
So for that alternate jersey that has an O, are they going to put an R apostrophe there for rebuilding? Okay. Let's look at some of the games from last night. Russ, you paid particular attention, and I turned on the Philadelphia Columbus game after the ending of the Leafs and Isles, and I saw the overtime, and was it Seth Jones with the overtime winner, 4-3. Again,
setting a record for the team too, by the way, for overtime winners already in his short career.
Yeah. Now the thing is, the Flyers are at 68 points. They're 6 points behind Carolina Hurricanes for the second wild card spot. They're also 6 points behind Pittsburgh. So just for those Flyers fans, that means that 2 teams have to collapse, not 1, 2. And we're talking about, you've got 18 games left. The odds of them gaining 6 points in 18 games are astronomical.
Yeah, I mean, you got a point last night, but you bled 2. And when you do that, you're not catching the team in front of you. So I'm already saying they're not catching Columbus. So if it comes down to the Flyers trying to catch Pittsburgh, they're going to play March 17th, I believe. I looked it up. And they're not going to win that game. I know they won the outdoor game. That's all well and good. But the Pittsburgh Penguins, knowing they have to make the playoffs, are going to have more will to win that game than the Flyers. The Flyers followed their normal thing. They fall behind, they catch up, they get it to overtime. Bob makes a big save in overtime, then all of a sudden Seth Jones goes down the other end and he acts like a winger and he gets the goal. The interesting thing about it is Jones and Panarin played an inordinate amount of time in that overtime. That's something the Flyers can't do. Claude Giroux can't do that anymore. He can't, double shift in an overtime. He doesn't have the legs for that. He's still a great player, but he doesn't have the legs for that. So that's where a team like Columbus at this time of the year does have an advantage if they get into overtime, and other teams too, because with 3-on-3, it's all about the skating. And really, the Flyers don't have enough of those guys. They've got a few of them, and they've got a few of them on the way, like Morgan Frost. But that's something where going down the stretch here, if they have games where they're going to play it tight and go to overtime, they're going to lose their fair share. Yeah. I was surprised Brian Elliott started. I was. Cam Talbot needed to get a start. He's getting a start tonight. I don't know. You don't always have to give a reward to a guy for winning a game to get the next start. I felt like at some point they needed to mix Cam Talbot in, because what if Cam Talbot is bad tonight? Like, he hasn't played in a long time. If he's bad tonight, that really, if they still believe they're in it, really hurts their chances. And that's something where it's like, you could have avoided that. He could have gotten in there sooner. So this is something where we're going to watch intently tonight. I'm not worried about Cam Talbot and pressure, but look, it's against the Devils, and the Devils have nothing to lose. They'll just play it fast and loose. Corey Schneider's in this one, who has finally rebounded this season, and he's gotten off the schneid and is doing better lately. So this is not going to be an easy game.
Not that this is Sesame Street, Jan, but which of these things doesn't belong? Columbus, Montreal, Carolina, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. Goal differential, +13, +10, +16, +21, -24. That's the Philadelphia Flyers. That's why they're not making the playoffs. That's why they're done. They've been done for a month, and they're
on a hot streak, and it's a great hot streak. I give them credit.
Yeah, I mean, but again, and I'll say this: for me, being the resident Hockey Buzz tank aficionado, they've blown an opportunity to get a good chance at drafting Jack Hughes for a futile run for the playoffs that they never had a realistic chance of getting back into. So I don't know what is being accomplished other than making yourself feel good, and other than watching Gritty skate around the Wells Fargo ice. I mean, it was dumb, and I don't get it. But of those teams, okay, because right now it's Columbus at 75, Montreal at 75, Carolina and Pittsburgh at 74 with a game in hand. Columbus has 63 games, so they have a game in hand too. And Philly at 68 with 64 games played. Of those teams, 3 of them will make the playoffs, and the other 2 won't. I mean, right now, I think Columbus, obviously with the additions that they made, Jan, I think they're they have the edge, but they have a tough schedule coming up, and Montreal benefits from playing a lot against their own division, and most of the division is crap. So I think it's between Carolina and Pittsburgh for that last wildcard spot. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's funny because both of them, in my opinion, is going to come down to goaltending. How healthy is Matt Murray? How healthy can Matt Murray stay? If Murray doesn't stay healthy, are you trusting Casey DeSmith, who's played fairly well, and Tristan Jarry to get the job done? On the flip side, in Carolina, Curtis McElhaney's been kind of a godsend, and you've had Peter Mrazek, I think, play better than expected. I mean, offensively, Carolina, with the guys that they have there, with Ferland, with Aho, with Teravainen, with Justin Williams really picking up his game, you look at that team, they can match Pittsburgh a little bit offensively, even though Pittsburgh has the super duper stars with, Malkin and Crosby. To me, the bigger question is going to be is how is the Pittsburgh blue line? How long is Letang out? How long is Dumoulin out? And the longer that both of those guys stay out, especially Letang, the more pressure that's on Justin Schultz and the more pressure that's going to be put on their goaltender. So if those guys are out longer term, I give the edge to Carolina, even though I think Pittsburgh has a better shot of making it. In terms of the other guys, I mean, Columbus is clearly – look, I think Columbus is going to battle Washington and the Islanders, even though the Islanders have a 6-point spread for the #1 spot in that division, especially if Bobrovsky keeps playing as he's played. So that's kind of my view on it. I do think it's amazing. Montreal, look, Price has played very well, and Price has played probably better than I think a lot of us would have expected, and the Drouin-Domi combination's been very good, and now that Shea Weber's back, it solidifies their blue line. So this is going to be one of those where come game 80, 81, and 82, you're going to see a lot of movement, I think, even on those last 3 games in terms of who's in and who's out of the playoffs.
They said Letang is short term.
What does that mean?
Yeah, right. They didn't specify. Dumoulin's got a concussion, so he could be out a while. I mean, they were playing Zach Trotman on their blue line a couple games ago. So I mean, it's gotten bad. It's like that's almost as bad as the Toronto situation, because not only do they not have Gardner and Dermott available, the couple of the guys that they would have called up from the Marlies are out. So that's why they had to call up Marinson and start playing Justin Hall. Okay. The one game from last night that wasn't exactly surprising, Tampa, who had won 10 games in a row, they go to Boston playing Louis Domingue in the second of back-to-back, and the Bruins have gone, I believe it's 14-0-2 in February, and they win 4-1. Now, Russ, now Boston has a 3-point lead on Toronto, equal in games. The two teams don't face each other the rest of the year. 3 points is not, a Herculean task to overcome, but based on the inconsistency of Toronto, I mean, they're going to have to depend on Boston being cooling off significantly for them to have a chance to get back into this.
Yeah, I think they would have to cool off significantly. I do. I think that's fair. Will it happen? I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
Russ, one quick thing. You talked about Tampa. Take a look at Louis Domingue's numbers. They're staggering how good he is. The guy almost never loses when he plays. He's 19-5 on the year.
Yeah.
Granted, obviously helped by a very good Tampa team because he's got a 2.91 goals against and a 908 save percentage. But if you look up in his last several games, generic until last night, he almost never lost. It's unbelievably impressive what he's done in terms of helping Tampa Bay get that #1 seed. And we talked about this time. Vasilevsky last year ran down as they approached the playoffs. With the time he missed with the injury and the confidence they have in Domingue, once they kind of clinch that #1 seed, they can give Vasilevsky as much rest as he needs, roll with Domingue without having any setbacks, and you're going to have a guy well-rested come playoff time, which may be a huge edge in coming out of the Atlantic Division beyond just winning the Eastern Conference and the Stanley Cup.
And that's what some people are saying Vegas should do down the stretch when it comes to Marc-Andre Fleury, because he's leading the NHL in game starts. Now they don't have as much of a cushion as Tampa Bay does. In fact, they're only 5 points ahead of Colorado for the wild card spot,
and 6 over Arizona also.
And 6 over, and yeah, that's incredible, because that team is the walking dead, and they're still sticking into it. But let's look at the West for a second here. Nashville at 79, Winnipeg at 78. Winnipeg has got 3 games in hand, so essentially Winnipeg is going to be in first place when they catch up to games. St. Louis at 74 in the Central at 63 games, so they have 3 games in hand on Nashville. Conceivably, if Winnipeg gets hot and if St. Louis stays hot, could end up in third place in that division, because there's three games in hand on both of them. In the Pacific, Calgary at an 89, second in the league behind Tampa, so they would have home ice advantage throughout the Western Conference playoffs. San Jose at 82, so it looks like the Flames are going to win that division, and San Jose is going to have to face Vegas in the first round. And Erik Karlsson has had some groin problems. He's going to sit out a week just for precautionary reasons.
Okay. That's smart.
Yeah. I mean, why not? I mean, basically, you're going to be second or third in the division, so you may as well. He's going to be an important piece for you. Wild card race.
And by the way, watching Florida, and I don't remember what the final was last night because I went
6-5.
Okay, Subban was not great, right? So Vegas, they really don't have an option if Marc-Andre Fleury goes bad because Malcolm Subban in big games will get lit up.
So it's an Anderson Sparks scenario when it comes to Vegas.
I think it is.
And in that case, what they have to do is manage Subban starts against teams. If they're playing bad teams, then play Subban against those bad teams and hope you can get points. In the wild card race, Dallas 69. They won over LA yesterday 4-3. Minnesota at 68. Colorado is tied at 68, and Arizona is at 67. And if you want to go further down, Chicago and Vancouver at 63. So they're 5 points out. I think they're, that's a little far. They'd have to really get hot and hope somebody drops off. But looking at the West, I mean, I'm skeptical still about Dallas and obviously Minnesota, Russ. But I mean, you can't take anything away from the Wild because in spite of trading some players away, they're sticking in it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I felt like they got something good in Donato. I still feel like they got something good in Fiala. These days, getting fresh young legs in your lineup, but it's not like Charlie Coyle's old. But again, these guys are just faster. Like Coyle serves, I mean, the way the Bruins play, he plays their kind of hockey, right?
Yep.
But Minnesota needed a little bit of a change. The guys that they've got will give them that change. And I think it's kind of interesting that now they're hanging in there. They're without Dumba. They're not going to get Koivu back. That's obvious. But Dumba could come back at some point. We don't know exactly when that is. But again, if Devin Dubnyk plays tough, they may still have enough to give teams trouble until Matt Dumba gets back. And I got to hand it to Bruce Boudreau because he did a couple things really right here that he hasn't gotten credit for. The first one was when he put Donato in the lineup. He said, look, I've seen it my whole life. When you put a young guy in the lineup, a lot of times they put him with veterans, and it doesn't work out because the veterans sort of, hold back the young guy with the speed and stuff. I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to put him with younger players, and that's really worked. And the one thing about Boudreau is he is not a guy that wards off change all the time. Like, he's willing to mix up lines and do those kinds of things. And maybe this is something where all of a sudden this is a year where, because it was forced on him by Fenton, that Boudreau has better success in the playoffs than he's had before. If they make the playoffs, I don't think they're an easy out. I'll just tell you that.
Jan,
so my view on this is I like what Boudreau's done. You mentioned obviously the injuries with Dumba,
yeah,
as well as with losing Koivu, and they kind of were able to rebound very quickly from both of those moves, especially the Dumba one. They played better than I think any of us would have expected in terms of the moves that they made. Kind of interesting in terms of the decision of getting rid of Granlund for Fiala. It's not one of those moves I was in favor of. Maybe short term it helps, but it's another one of the long line of deals where they got rid of Rask and got rid of Niederreiter and got Rask. To me, in my opinion, that was an absolutely horrific trade. Like the addition of Donato, definitely helped the team. Definitely got younger with Fiala, but gave up a better player in Granlund. So it almost makes you wonder: is Paul Fenton going, you know what? If we make the playoff this year, it's great, but I'm building for a longer-term future because of all the injuries we've had this year, and I'm going to go for the guys who are younger to hopefully get us to that stage down the road, as opposed to worrying about if we're going to make a playoff run this year. And if we do, it's gravy. But if not, I'm set up for the future. That said, love the Donato deal. I can deal with the Fiala for Granlund deal if that's the view. Even though as much as I like Fiala, I think Granlund is very underrated. The Rask for Niederreiter deal, in my opinion, was absolutely a horrific deal. But if Dubnyk stays hot, that's going to carry them. With Dallas losing Zuccarello, who clearly looked like he meshed very nicely during the first 2 periods before he got hurt is a very huge loss for them. But getting Lovejoy and having Lovejoy get paired with the guys that he's going to be paired with, either with the 2 young defensemen, with either Klingberg or Heiskanen, is really going to help them as well.
I do think Dallas is in a little bit of trouble, though. I do.
I agree. I mean, first of all, Bishop has been in and out with injuries. They've had to rely more on Khudobin and Landon Bow as the backup. I think Heiskanen is going to be a top pairing defenseman. He's really good, but they're putting a burden on a guy who's 19 going on 20. I mean, it's, and the funny thing is that under Montgomery, this is a team that was top echelon in the NHL in goal scoring, but they couldn't keep the puck out of the net. They have one of the better goals against in the league, and now they can't score. So they're selling out defensively, but it's affecting their offense. And that's why the addition of Zuccarello was important, because he provided another guy who could score, and to lose him for 4 weeks, that's tough. And Colorado seems to be getting back on track now after basically being one of the worst teams in the league for 2 months.
Yeah, they had a bad run there. They did.
Yeah, and now, so I mean, it's one of Dallas, Minnesota, or two of the 3, Dallas, Minnesota, or Colorado, with an outside chance of Arizona. I mean, Russ, that's the thing I don't get. How in the hell is the Coyotes doing this?
It's a good question. I think Rick Tocchet deserves a lot of credit. I think he has figured out the right lineup. I mean, we all thought if they were going to have success, that Antti Ranta would be part of it, right?
Right.
So sometimes hockey's a weird game, and sometimes it just takes a coach to do the right things. I mean, Richardson had 4 goals last night.
Yeah, what do you have, 11 in his career before that or something in that range?
I mean, sometimes things go right, and
Darcy Kemper. It's like Kemper's world. We're just living in it.
That's like Mark. That's like Mark Whitten hitting 4 home runs for the Cardinals in Cincinnati a few years back. I mean, it's like that. The guy did hit less than 100 home runs in his career, I think, and he hit 4 in 1 game. So
didn't Mark Whitten also have? No, I think he was the one who thought he had spiders on him, right? That whole story.
Glenn Allen Hill.
Huh?
I think it was Glenn Allen Hill who had.
Glenn Allen Hill was the guy. Yes.
Yeah, they're both ex-Blue Jay outfield prospects. Yeah. So I understand.
So I mean, they're doing it without that, but I understand that Derek Stepan got an injury.
He did. He got a knee injury yesterday. They think could keep him out a while.
And that could be a derailment there, because I don't think they have a replacement for Derek Stepan. So that's something where I'm sure Coyotes fans are hoping that that's not the case, because things have gone really well up to this point.
Just one couple brief notes here. And the NHL released their 3 stars of the week: Kucherov, Patrick Kane, and Tarasenko. They also released was that 3 stars of the month? Let me just check. 3 stars.
It was a month. They also said rookie of the month.
Yeah, that was yes, and Jordan Bennington, rookie of the month for February. I don't know where I've heard that name before, Russ.
I'm really shocked. That's all I can say.
I don't know. It's like I've never heard of this guy before. I don't recall anybody ever mentioning him on the show.
We've never talked about him on the show. He's seemingly come out of nowhere.
I had Binnington in one of my leagues years ago and cut him when it looked like he wasn't going to do anything.
Lack of foresight.
Well, yeah, sure. We clearly saw. Everybody saw this coming. Clearly, I think they're calling him Jordan Winnington is what I think his new nickname is.
Oh, please! They came up with a whole slew of bad nicknames for him on TSN last night. It was pretty bad.
I do want to bring up, the one thing that I had brought up on Twitter about the Coyotes that I don't know if I brought up on the show is Connor Garland. That's a guy who they've really stuck with, and he's got 12 goals this year. He only has 3 assists, but he has 12 goals.
And they signed him to a 2-year extension. I think $775 a year. So, I'm telling you right now, that is going to be the trend right now. Is anybody shows anything in the NHL, they call him up from the minors, and he plays well for 2 weeks. He's getting a 2-year extension, because it happened with Trevor Moore in Toronto. He came up for 3 or 4 games. They like what they saw. They think, okay, this guy could be part of our team next year. And it's below the amount that if it doesn't work, they can send him down to the minors and not take a cap hit. They're going to give him one-way deals for a couple years, because they know that they can plug them in and they're cheap. And when you're paying one player $11 million, which obviously Arizona is not doing, but they'll just pay that in money that they take on in trades, like taking on like Nathan Horton's deal or somebody like that. But other teams, when they're paying Mitch Marner or Jeff Skinner for the Sabres, they're going to need cheap talent on the third and fourth line and the bottom defensive pairing. That's going to be the trend in this league.
It is going to be the trend.
Okay, good show, guys. We will be back on Monday with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast. For Jan Levine, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.